Well, hello. Thank you for joining me. I am RVD, the Dudar, your friendly neighborhood Canadian, recording from a hotel room on my laptop, camera, and microphone. So I apologize for that. In this new beer virus world, the end of the world, of course, I would be stuck in small town Alberta, Laklabish, a place that doesn't even care about this virus. It's crazy. It's crazy, but that's a whole other story. One good thing about this beer virus that we're not allowed to say on YouTube because YouTube is stupid apparently, and in denial, just like old white Americans and their denial of the adult film industry and women's rights and rights to their bodies and you know black people. I'm recording YouTube videos because I'm bored. I have nothing else to do. So that's one positive. So cheers. I'm drinking some Coca-Cola. So this video, it's funny. This is a brand new segment on my low-end amateur YouTube channel. It's about wrestling. I'm gonna think of a cool title. I don't know if it's gonna be like RVD's wrestling memories or nostalgia wrestling or something. But this video in particular is about WrestleMania Dream Matches that never happened. And we're going to talk about the first WrestleMania match, Dream Match, that never happened, that probably should have happened. And it's, for me, back in the day when I was a little kid, starting off as a wrestling fan and getting taken by the grand spectacle of professional World Wrestling Federation sports entertainment and the National Wrestling Alliance, and finding out about American Wrestling Association and Stampede Wrestling and all these things. I remember this was the first match that I couldn't believe never happened. That didn't happen. The match was Hulk Hogan versus the Ultimate Warrior for the WWF World Heavyweight Championship that was originally supposed to be scheduled and booked for WrestleMania 7 on March 24th, 1991. It was going to be the rematch from WrestleMania 6, the Ultimate Challenge, where the Ultimate Warrior was the Intercontinental Champion and Hulk Hogan was the WWF World Heavyweight Champion, and it was champion versus champion, title for title. It was WrestleMania 6, April 1st, 1990, Toronto Skydome, and history was made. The Ultimate Warrior became the WWF World Heavyweight Champion. It was the first time in WWF history that one wrestler was holding both championship titles at the same time. The Ultimate Warrior was standing supreme over the wrestling world. He was the Intercontinental Champion and the World Heavyweight Champion. Well, then a couple weeks later, WWF President Jack Tunney stripped the Ultimate Warrior of the Intercontinental Championship. I forget what the reasons were for wrestling, but honestly, it was, they needed to use that championship belt. It would have been great for the Ultimate Warrior to defend both for a little while, but, kind of makes sense. It's a little greedy, especially back then when WWF only had 3 championships, really. So that led to Jack Tunney and the WWF, Jack Tunney. Stay with me, some kayfabe stuff obviously going on, some wrestling terminology, suspension of disbelief back in the glory days. Jack Tunney created an intercontinental title tournament that played out over the next few weeks on various WWF syndicated television shows. I caught it on Maple Leaf Wrestling in Canada. It was on Superstars of Wrestling and and various places all over the United States and the world. And the final of the Intercontinental title tournament was between Tito Santana, who was the surprise of that championship tournament, and Mr. Perfect. Mr. Perfect, Kurt Hennig. Mr. Perfect eventually beat Tito Santana in the finals to become the WWF Intercontinental Champion sometime in April of 1990, thus beginning his first pretty good reign as Intercontinental Champion. So the Ultimate Warrior was the WWF World Heavyweight Champion. Hulk Hogan was done from wrestling for a while. He needed a vacation. He needed time off. Excuse me. He was filming a movie. And the wrestling world went on. And back then, in 1990, I was a huge Ultimate Warrior fan. He was my favorite wrestler by far. And was my favorite wrestler for a long time. And it's honestly, when I think of my top 5 favorite wrestlers of all time, the Ultimate Warrior is in my top 5. May he rest in peace. So WWF went on, and this was back in the day, like 1990. Like, think about it. There was only 4 pay-per-views a year. There was the Royal Rumble, WrestleMania, SummerSlam, and Survivor Series. Those were the golden age of WWF. And most people didn't even get pay-per-view. So I remember watching WrestleMania 6, finally seeing WrestleMania 6 on VHS at my girlfriend's house sometime in early May, maybe? Because I think there was a 6-week to 8-week delay for the WWF pay-per-views to come out on VHS, and you rented it on video stores. Old school. I know, crazy. So anyway, Ultimate Warrior was WWF World Champion. He was doing a great job. SummerSlam, he defended the title against Ravishing Rick Rude in a steel cage match, because Ravishing Rick Rude at the time was the only wrestler to ever beat the Ultimate Warrior. Even though he had a little help from Bobby the Brain Heenan at WrestleMania 5, Ravishing Rick Rude held that distinction. So, Ravishing Rick Rude was going after the world title, and it was a great feud, and it made logic sense even back then. Obviously, the Ultimate Warrior defeated Ravishing Rick Rude in the main event of SummerSlam 90, and then Ultimate Warrior continued feuding with other wrestlers, and then at Survivor Series 1990, I think it was Ultimate Warrior, Kerry Von Erich, the Texas Tornado, and the Legion of Doom. I think they were a team at Survivor Series 1990. Probably maybe the greatest 4 wrestlers on a Survivor Series team of all time. And then, Ultimate Warrior was, beating everyone that challenged him. He was beating the $1 Million Man Ted DiBiase. He was beating Dino Bravo. He was beating Earthquake. And then he started a feud with Macho King, Randy Savage. And then Hulk Hogan eventually slowly came back. Hulk Hogan came back at SummerSlam 90. I think he wrestled Earthquake, I want to say. Earthquake came. Yeah, Hulk Hogan versus Earthquake at SummerSlam 90, I believe. Because it was like a double main event kind of thing. And then Survivor Series 90 had a weird twist where like all the survivors of all the winners of the Survivor Series matches like had an ultimate final Survivor Series match. And it was like the Ultimate Warrior, Hulk Hogan, and Tito Santana versus like 5 bad guys in a special bonus match, an Ultimate Survivor Series match. It's crazy. Crazy back then. WWF and all those things. But anyway, after WrestleMania 6, or during WrestleMania 6, they announced that WrestleMania 7 was going to take place a year later, March 24th, 1991, in Los Angeles, at the Los Angeles Coliseum, where the Olympics were held, where the 1984 Olympics were held. And the main reason they picked that spot was because they wanted to break the attendance record of WrestleMania 3. Now, that attendance record back then, 93,173 people, is in dispute. There are some rumors that WWF only really had over 80,000 fans, and some fans didn't show up, and Vince McMahon and the WWF exaggerated the number. But that was the number most wrestling fans knew. and the world knew. So the plan was for WrestleMania 7 to be held at the Los Angeles Sports Coliseum. I think that's what it was called. Huge outdoor stadium. And they were going to try to break. They wanted 100,000 fans. Well, there's only one match in that everyone would want to see. There's only one match that could probably guarantee that many people. And that would be the WrestleMania 6 rematch between now challenger Hulk Hogan versus WWF World Champion The Ultimate Warrior. And that was the match they were teasing. And they've been teasing it and setting it up from SummerSlam 90 to Survivor Series 90 and sprinkling the feelers that that was going to be the main event of WrestleMania 7, which would have been amazing. That would have been amazing. So sometime in early 1991, Ultimate Warrior is feuding with the Macho King Randy Savage. And the Iraq War begins. Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, all that stuff. And prior to that, Vince McMahon and the WWF bring back Sergeant Slaughter, and he comes back as a bad guy. And he comes back in the fall of 1990. They do these vignettes with Sergeant Slaughter being the anti-American hero. He's anti-American. He's disgusted with American and their lack of a whole bunch of things that Sergeant Slaughter used to stand up for. So Sergeant Slaughter was returning as a bad guy. And then the Iraq War happens. And Vince McMahon, as he does, obviously recently, the last 30 years. But back then, Vince McMahon did something weird. He decided to make Sergeant Slaughter an Iraqi sympathizer. And then they brought in the Iron Sheik and they renamed him Colonel Mustafa. And they paired Colonel Mustafa with Sergeant Slaughter, who is now an Iraqi sympathizer. And he was pro-Saddam Hussein. And then they started this thing where Sergeant Slaughter was praising Saddam Hussein. And obviously was bringing a lot of heat because America, right? America. Say what you want about the United States of America, and it's 2020, and we could do endless YouTube videos about the United States of America and all its faults and stupidity. But for a long time before Donald Trump came and the political system in the States changed, Americans were good at being Americans, and they would defend America. They don't do that anymore. But back then, everyone was against Sergeant Slaughter, praising Saddam Hussein and being on the wrong side of the Iraqi war. And who's the greatest American superhero professional wrestler of all time? The real American Hulk Hogan. And then I guess there were some behind the scenes issues with whether they thought the Ultimate Warrior was doing a good job being the world champ. And I think he was doing a great job. I was a fan. I loved him. And I think many fans were buying into the Ultimate Warrior as a world champ. But a decision was made, and Ultimate Warrior was scheduled to defend the WWF World Championship against Sergeant Slaughter at Royal Rumble 1991. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. So Ultimate Warrior is going to beat Sergeant Slaughter. Hulk Hogan's going to win the Royal Rumble. And then at WrestleMania 7, we're going to get the match everyone wanted. The first actual dream match, return match that wrestling fans wanted. Hulk Hogan versus the Ultimate Warrior 2. This time, Hogan's the challenger versus Warrior, the world champ. And even me being a kid wrestling fan, I'm like, Hogan's going to win. They have to let Hogan win. Hogan gets the revenge, right? And then you have, a third match and who knows. But that's money. And you don't turn Ultimate Warrior, it's still favorite versus favorite, good guy versus good guy, just like at WrestleMania 6. And I think that would have sold 100,000 seats. Easy. Well, apparently hindsight's 2020, and you discover things about professional wrestling as you get older and you're removed from the situation. And yeah, apparently early advance ticket sales for WrestleMania 7 weren't great, but they didn't have a main event yet. So how can you blame people for not buying tickets? See, back then, WrestleMania wasn't the cultural experience that it has been for the last, say, 15 years, where people from all over the world go to WrestleMania. It's a WrestleMania weekend party. It's the fan access. It's the Hall of Fame. It's all these events. It's WrestleMania week when WrestleMania takes over a city. This was still, early 90s. WrestleMania was the biggest pay per view ever. It's the biggest wrestling card of the year. It always was. But it didn't have that cachet yet. But I guarantee you, if Ultimate Warrior beat Sergeant Slaughter at Royal Rumble and Hulk Hogan winning the Royal Rumble, and the next week, the next 2 weeks, you announce WrestleMania 7, Hogan versus Warrior, the rematch, people start going. People start buying tickets. And you pump up that match, that would have sold 100,000 tickets. I think it would have. Obviously, that's not what happened. That's being the first WrestleMania Dream Match we never got. Ultimate Warrior wrestles Sergeant Slaughter. Macho King Randy Savage comes in, interferes in the match, hits the Ultimate Warrior with his scepter. Ultimate Warrior's hurt. Sergeant Slaughter, I think, body slams him or something. And Sergeant Slaughter pins the Ultimate Warrior. And Sergeant Slaughter becomes WWF World Heavyweight Champion. I remember because I watched that pay-per-view in a pool hall. Back in the day, in the old days, sometimes bars, sometimes sports places would show wrestling pay-per-views. I'm sure it still happens and happened for many decades after that. But we were at a place in West Edmonton Mall. I forget the name. But me and a couple of my buddies on that Sunday night, or when the Royal Rumble was, we were playing pool in West Edmonton Mall in phase 2, upper level somewhere, playing pool, and they had the Royal Rumble on. So you'd play pool, and Royal Rumble was on the many TVs. And I remember being stunned that Sergeant Slaughter had just beat the Ultimate Warrior. And then I was like, so now Ultimate Warrior is going to continue feuding with Macho King Randy Savage. And then Sergeant Slaughter doing his pro-Iraq, pro-America's Evil, siding with Saddam Hussein in a legitimate war, is bringing a lot of heat. So Vince McMahon is like, all right, Hulk Hogan versus Sergeant Slaughter. So that becomes the main event for WrestleMania 7. And then Ultimate Warrior challenges Macho King Randy Savage to another epic main event match. And then a couple weeks later, a stipulation is made that it will be a retirement, a career-ending match for Ultimate Warrior and Macho King Randy Savage to add some, more fire to that flame. And Hulk Hogan challenging Sergeant Slaughter for the WWF World Heavyweight Championship. Those are your two big main events for WrestleMania 7. I guess tickets were doing decent, but the heat with Sergeant Slaughter in the late 1990 and early 1991 was so insane. Because granted, this is still a time where many people are still believing professional wrestling is real. Even wrestling fans, most of them are believing professional wrestling is real. Sergeant Slaughter starts getting legitimate death threats. People start phoning, threatening Vince McMahon, WWF headquarters, Sergeant Slaughter, legitimately threatening his life. That's how much heat that angle had. Sergeant Slaughter was the most hated wrestler in the world. It was crazy. So a decision was made to move WrestleMania 7 from the 100,000 seats open-air stadium to the Los Angeles Coliseum, Sports Coliseum, whatever it was called. And I think it held 15 to 17,000 fans. So it was an arena, right? A big arena. I'm pretty sure that's where the LA Lakers played. So that decision was made. WrestleMania 7 sold out. And we got the Ultimate Warrior versus Macho King Randy Savage in a career-ending match, which was the best match of that card by far, and in my opinion was the best match of 1991, and one of the best matches the Ultimate Warrior ever had, with the Ultimate Warrior defeating Macho King Randy Savage, and then we had the great Elizabeth coming out of the crowd to save Randy Savage from being beaten up in disgrace by Sensational Queen Sherry, and then Elizabeth and Macho King reunited, kind of got back together, and then Macho King, the Macho Man, got his retirement send off, his WrestleMania moment, as he should, because Macho Man Randy Savage, even though he spent the last few years as a heel, as a bad guy, was still one of the most respected and most beloved wrestlers in WWF history. So he got to go out on a high note, even though he lost to the Ultimate Warrior in one of the best career-ending matches of all time. And then the main event was Hulk Hogan defeating Sergeant Slaughter in the main event, which actually was a pretty good main event for Hulk Hogan matches, even for Sergeant Slaughter. Hogan wins the WWF World Championship for a third time in the main event of WrestleMania 7, reclaims the championship, and America and faith is restored. But that match should have been Hulk Hogan versus the Ultimate Warrior. And that was the first time a WrestleMania Dream Match that many people had thought, that many people had bought into, that many wrestling fans were aching to see, didn't happen. And then guess what? Hulk Hogan reigned as WWF World Champion for most of 1991. Ultimate Warrior started an epic feud with like Jake the Snake Roberts, later on with The Undertaker, started fighting big bads. But we never got to see Ultimate Warrior and Hulk Hogan again wrestle each other in WWF. And at SummerSlam 91, which could have been a great place to do that, we got a tag team match where it was Hulk Hogan and the Ultimate Warrior versus Sergeant Slaughter and Colonel Mustafa, with newcomer Sid Justice, who was Sid Vicious from the NWA WCW, as the guest referee. That was the main event of SummerSlam 91. Besides the match made in heaven, Macho Man Randy Savage and Miss Elizabeth getting married in Madison Square Garden, and the match made in hell, which was Ultimate Warrior and Hulk Hogan teaming up at SummerSlam 91 against Sergeant Slaughter and Colonel Mustafa. There had to be someone else in that. I think there was someone else. I think it was 2 versus 3. And then we all know what happened after that. But anyway, WrestleMania 7 was the first time Vince McMahon and WrestleMania dropped the ball on a guaranteed moneymaker, a guaranteed WrestleMania Dream Match. WrestleMania 7, Hogan versus Warrior, the match we never got. What could have been? Anyway, those are my thoughts. I'm going to do a series of videos about WrestleMania Dream Matches I thought that should have happened, give you some backstory, and explain why they didn't happen from a Canadian wrestling fan's perspective, going back in time, back in those days when I was a wrestling fan and didn't know that much. Anyway, thanks for listening to me talk for 20 odd minutes. Ultimate Warrior is one of my favorite wrestlers of all time. And I later learned that Hulk Hogan was a scumbag. So everything kind of worked out. Thanks for watching. Subscribe. And enjoy this first part of WrestleMania Dream Matches that never happened. Cheers.